Welcome, everyone, to another special episode of the Your Morning Coffee podcast, a conversation with Pete Ganbarg. Pete is a two-time Grammy Award-winning record producer, A&R executive, and music publisher, and the president of Pure Tone Music. He has worked with superstar artists like Santana on that 9 times Grammy Award-winning album Supernatural, Lin-Manuel Miranda on the Diamond-certified Hamilton Cast album, as well as contemporary stars like 21 Pilots, Christina Perri, Melanie Martinez, to name just a few.
Pete is currently teaching A&R, past, present, and future, a deep dive into the recording industry at Wesleyan University. His podcast, Rock and Roll High School, which began as an internal music history class for his A&R team at Atlantic Records, is now in its 5th season and has hosted legends like Graham Nash, Nile Rodgers, The Temptations, Clive Davis, Peter Frampton, and many more. Pete and I discuss the evolution of A&R, disruption, what students need to know about the music business today, and a lot more. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Pete Ganbarg. Let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Pete, it is so good to see you. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to talk with me today.
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. Pleasure to be with you, man.
I really appreciate it. So let's jump right in. I want to start with teaching Wesleyan, sort of the classroom experience. Your course is called A&R, Past, Present, and Future. So when students today walk in on the first day, what do they fundamentally misunderstand about maybe what A&R actually is?
I don't think anyone knows what it is. And, it's one of these things that if we do our jobs right as A&R people, nobody should know what it is because it's kind of the invisible fingerprints behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So the best compliment that someone can pay me is, I didn't know you did that. Like, yeah, we're invisible. We're kind of, like the CIA super spies who show up and then disappear.
Right. So you've taught at Berkeley, NYU's Clive Davis Institute, and now Wesleyan. Does a student at a liberal arts school like Wesleyan come to the industry differently than ones from a conservatory style program?
Yeah, it's interesting because I went to Wesleyan as a student. Wesleyan's a great school. That's where Lin-Manuel Miranda went, the guy Mike White, who created White Lotus, and the guys who created How I Met Your Mother. It's a very, very creatively minded school. So even though it doesn't have a music business program, there are kids there who are interested. And those kids, stand out on campus because it's not a business program like NYU Clive is or like Berkeley is. I've taught this class now 5 or 6 different times at different schools, and it's interesting to see the difference in the students because, there are students who are career track, there are students who are more liberal arts bent, who are just curious, and sometimes those are the best kind of students to teach.
Yeah, you've been doing this 35 years at the highest level. What's the hardest thing to teach? The part of A&R that just can't be put in a syllabus.
There's a great quote that I teach the kids. There's a legendary record man who passed away a couple of years ago named Seymour Stein.
Sure.
And Seymour Stein started the legendary label Sire Records. When he was 14 years old, he was obsessed with music. And he actually was working as a 14-year-old, probably as an unpaid intern in the chart department at Billboard magazine for a guy named Tommy Noonan. And together, Tommy is the guy who created the Hot 100, the big chart at Billboard. Mm-hmm. And Seymour helped him when he was 14 years old. There were a bunch of people who would visit the Billboard chart department and the Billboard, singles review meetings that Seymour was in. One of them was also a legendary record man from Cincinnati named Sid Nathan, who had a label called King Records with James Brown. Sid died in the late 60s, so nobody really talks about him anymore. But he was like right out of Central Casting, a real character of the music business. And when he met Seymour, he said, "Oh, I get it. You're one of us." So he goes to Seymour's parents and says, "The kid's got to come out to Cincinnati. I want to teach him everything I know. This is his future." And his parents like, "Why?" And Seymour says, "You don't understand. He's got shellac in his veins." Shellac obviously
Sure.
being the chemical compound that was vinyl before vinyl. And that's what an A&R person is. It's somebody who is obsessed with not only music, because a lot of people are obsessed with music, but it's somebody who's obsessed with understanding how music can travel from its inception to the ears of everybody in the world. And that's not, something that a lot of people care about or interested in or have the skill set to do it. I met, it's my own Sid Nathan Seymour Stein story is I met a kid when he was 16 years old in high school out in New Jersey where I used to live. And it was the same thing. I didn't say, "Oh, you have shellac in your veins." But the day I met him, I'm like, "Oh, you're an A&R guy." And he said, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Tomorrow after school, come over. I'm going to start teaching you what this is and how to do it because this is what you do." And that kid today is the head of A&R at Atlantic. So it's kind of like generation to generation. We have to mentor and we have to teach.
Beautifully put. Have any of your students shown you something, a new artist, a trend, a platform that maybe surprised you or educated you?
Yeah, that's why I'm there, because I'm not 18. They are. And an 18-year-old's brain is going to work a lot different than a 50-something-year-old brain. So, I've signed some of the students as songwriters. I've hired some of the students as A&Rs. I'm not in it to, teach for charity. I'm in it to actually, help, what I do be better, right? And, if I could find a college kid that could help me do that, or 2 or 6 or 10, great.
Love that. So let's talk about the podcast. It started as something for your class. Actually, it started I think as for your A&R team at Atlantic. What made you realize that it sort of needed to be public?
Well, it was kind of COVID that made us do it on Zoom. And when you're doing it on Zoom, when you're interviewing some of the most legendary talent of all time, on a Zoom, you can just hit record like we're doing today, and why not share it with the world? So it was COVID that we can thank for taking our, podcast series to the public, Rock and Roll High School. And the whole idea of Rock and Roll High School was to interview the legends of contemporary music who helped create the music that we all listen to. And don't just hear from me about it, hear from them about it. So it's kind of telling the history of contemporary music, one artist at a time in their own words. And we're closing in on 100 episodes. We obviously have a lot more to go, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I just love seeing how the sausage is made. And you've had some incredible guests, Nile Rodgers, Clive Davis, Graham Nash. Is there any question when you're interviewing these people that you might be a little nervous to ask?
Not now. Now it's like riding a bike. In the beginning, I remember the first interview I ever did on Zoom. It's never, we never recorded it because I was still not sure what I was doing back then, was Paul Schaefer. Mm-hmm. And I was so nervous. that I didn't know what I was doing. And like, a couple of hours later, I'm like, okay, I think we're done. He's like, oh my God, thank God. So I've learned a lot since then.
Oh, I bet. So season 5 is underway. Is that right?
Yeah, season 5 is going to be our largest because my goal is to hit 100 episodes. Right now we're in the 80s, so I definitely want season 5 to hit 100. So I think we're putting out episode number 12 this week, and then we got to get to 30 to hit 100. So that's the goal.
You're on your way. Is there a guest that you haven't gotten yet that still feels like that big white whale?
All of them,
Yeah.
it's I haven't gotten, the biggest of the big, and why would I? Because, why would Elton John or Bruce Springsteen want to talk to me? But if they do, I'm here, guys. They probably listen to you. They don't listen to me. So if you're listening to this podcast, guys, would love to talk to you.
I think you will get those. Sometimes it's just asking, and I tell college students this all the time. Just ask. You can reach out to somebody via LinkedIn or through their socials or whatever. I had Seth Godin on the podcast. I didn't think he would be someone who would come on the podcast, but sometimes you just ask and they're like, yeah, I'd love to. So good luck with that. I want to switch gears here a little bit, Pete. Everybody I know in the music industry today is talking about generative AI, everything from stem separation, translations, noise reduction, demo production, and then also generating words and music via a text prompt. And I know this is something you know about and that you're passionate about and you want to educate yourself and your students about. Where do you sit with AI in the music industry today?
I think if you get scared of technology, you should basically go put your head in the sand, because as somebody who teaches the history of A&R and the history of recorded music, on the business side, there's always been technology and it's always scared everybody. Going from the actual player piano to the first recorded cylinder that Thomas Edison invented, people were freaking out, you know? So this is the 150-year later version of that same freak out. And you could trace it, from player piano to cylinder to shellac to vinyl to compact disc to digital download to file sharing. You can't put your head in the sand because technology is going to be here whether you like it or not.
Yeah, 100%. On the current music industry, you signed developing acts and 21 Pilots, Lin-Manuel Miranda. In today's market, where streaming data is available like right at your fingertips, do you think that data is helping A&R or quietly killing it?
I think it's got to be both. It's got to be, you talk about head and heart, right? Data is head, gut is heart, and you got to do both. You got to be able to say, oh shit, this thing is already going. I'd be an idiot not to pursue it. But you also have to remember why we're all here in the first place, which is just listening to something that puts a smile on our face and changes our mood. And if that thing that we hear hasn't hit the algorithm yet, who cares?
Yeah. So Flowers by Miley Cyrus won Record of the Year. Ordinary by Alex Warren went to #1 globally. As a publisher, what does a song need to have in 2026 that maybe it didn't need 10 years ago?
Well, Alex Warren, who's an artist that I helped sign at Atlantic, and then I signed his primary producer, Adam Urone, as a songwriter to my publishing company. So even though I don't actively A&R Alex on the label side, I'm still involved as the music publisher. For Adam, one of his key collaborators. I think what Alex is so good at is he understands social media better than most. So a great example of this is he lives in real time. It's not like he is saying, okay, 3 weeks from Thursday, we'll start doing this. It's real life. Real life doesn't stop. So back in February at the Grammys, he had an incident where the playback in his inner ears malfunctioned. And so his timing was off when he was performing Ordinary on the Grammys. Rather than go into isolation and bum out about it. He did the smartest thing that any artist who's got a very strong following could do. He went on social media that night, owned it, played what he heard in his in-ears for everybody so they could hear what he was hearing. But that's not the genius part of it. The genius part of it is he's like, oh, and by the way, here's my next song. And then every day for the next 6 weeks, he teased that song. So when that song came out, it was already on its way. That's what you need to do in 2026 to continually engage with your audience. And he's a genius at it.
Yeah. Sounds like he took control and changed the narrative there.
100%. Not easy to do.
No. The major label system that you've worked in for 35 years is under pressure from independent distribution, AI generated music, artist direct models. Is A&R a discipline actually in danger in your opinion, or does disruption always ultimately lead to something new?
Again, for me, generative AI is a tool in the toolbox, the way that any technology has been. In the creation side of music, AI to me is a tool the way that sampling was, the way that interpolation was. People forget, it was only 50 years ago that the new technology was synthesized music. Stevie Wonder heard about this contraption called Tonto, Tonto, which was developed by these two recording engineers, one named Malcolm Cecil, one named Bob Margolef. And he brought them in, and that kind of changed the arc of his career. But it was new technology that people were scared of, because nobody, now a synth is on every record. But back then, it was like almost staring at one of the original antiquated mainframe computers. Like, what does this thing do? So I think you have to embrace it. And in terms of the question about, does this replace A&R? A&R still needs to be human because, some of the best artists of all time would show up at somebody's office, sit down at a piano, and just play a song. That's what Alicia Keys did. That's what Prince did. There was no algorithm. There was no AI. It was just real music. That's not going to go away.
I moderated a panel at Music Tectonics once on data and A&R, and everybody was talking about all of the data that they get and where they get it and their own homegrown systems. But the thing I won't forget about that conversation was an A&R person said, when asked, how do you discover new talent today? What data platforms do you use? He said that he looks for a lineup around the block to see that band play on a Tuesday night.
Right. That's how we all used to do it. And that, should not become antiquated because, you can algorithm all you want, you can AI all you want. If somebody is, what is that meme, with the somebody reaching into their pocket and saying, take my money, take my money, take my money. If somebody, you can't manufacture a hard ticket. You can't manufacture a T-shirt. If somebody wants to go and pay real money to see their favorite artist live, like just sweating it out, playing some of the notes wrong, that's what music is all about, and that's not going to go away. But AI is not going to go away either. So you have to learn to live with both, and you have to learn to understand, how each works to be able to do your job better as an A&R person.
Yeah. So, Pete, you now run 2 publishing companies. What does that shift from signing artists to protecting songs? What does that teach you about where the real long-term value in music actually lives?
I mean, the greatest record in the world is one finite thing. The greatest copyright in the world is a million finite things. So I realized that as long as I was doing A&R for a major label, the ownership ultimately laid with them, right? There was I could, bring in a project that could make the company a lot of money and maybe I would get a bonus off of it or something. But on the publishing side, if I could apply the A&R skill set to finding a young songwriter and developing that young songwriter so that they could, over time, without cutting corners and taking shortcuts, they could actually be creating songs that could change people's lives, and I could help them, almost like teaching a kid how to ride a tricycle and then a bicycle with training wheels. Once the training wheels come off, they know how to do it. If it's going to take a few years to learn how to ride the songwriting bicycle, if you're 17 years old, let me help you, and the difference in doing that for a songwriter versus doing it for an artist at a record label is I'll be their partners in these copyrights. And the copyrights, like you mentioned, Flowers that we publish on Miley, or Ordinary that we publish on Alex, these are songs that are going to be around a long time. It's a great business.
I was talking to a friend of mine about songs that we really love that we knew right away they were special. I'd love to hear from you. Like, how do you know when you hear a song? Do you get, a lump in your throat or the hair on the back of your neck goes up? Or how does that manifest itself? Because it's different for everyone, but when you hear the genuine article.
Yeah, it's what I learned a long time ago is I know when, the spidey sense goes up that, wow, this could be something. But I also have learned the hard way that my opinion, that spidey sense, doesn't ultimately matter. The only opinion that matters in the game that we're playing here is the public's opinion. So I could get the lump in my throat, the goosebumps, the whole thing, and then the public could, raise their collective middle finger and, back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I would be a horrible A&R person. A lot of the things that I fall in love with, they're not maybe commercially successful. I love the band Jellyfish, for example, and they were never the success that I thought they should have been, but that's not my world. I guess you have to sort of separate what's good and lights you up with what's commercially viable.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by why do people like what they like? And again, this is not my opinion. It's like, let's figure out what they like. Why do they like this and not like this? Because I'm not, trying to create a museum piece. I'm trying to help create music that is going to connect with a large audience on a global scale.
Yeah. You have a passion for Broadway, I read. Talk about the music ecosystem. How does it differ, the Broadway sort of ecosystem with music, to traditional music business?
I think music is music. Everything is cyclical, and that's something that if you study the history of music business, everything repeats. So when I was a kid, I remember listening, we'd go on long car drives with the family and have the old, 1975 Cadillac with an 8-track cassette player in it, right? And the 8-track tape player. And one of the tapes that we had was the soundtrack to the cast album of A Chorus Line, which was a big Broadway musical in the 70s. And we listened to that and we knew every song backwards and forwards. To us, that was as much pop music as anything that was on the radio. And that's always stuck with me. There's no reason why Broadway music can't be pop music, even if it's gone into hibernation on a commercial level, for decades. So I had that in mind when going into my boss's office at Atlantic and saying, hey, there's this show. It's not open yet, but I saw a reading of it, and I think it could be really, really special. I think this could be the song, that this could be the Broadway album, the Broadway music that gets people listening to this genre again. And I had two bosses at the time. One, the left brain who only cared about the bottom line, the numbers. The right brain who cared about, changing the world creatively through doing weird stuff, right? So obviously, which side, wanted to do it and which side didn't do it. But ultimately, we won. We signed that project and it came true. It was Hamilton. And, that ended up now selling, Diamond. And I think it's probably the only Broadway cast album that has been certified diamond for sales of over 10 million copies in America. And that was me taking a shot just because I was remembering that 50 years ago, this kind of music was pop music. Why couldn't it be again? And we got that one right. We got lucky. You don't get them right all the time. I always say that as an A&R, if you're batting 300, you're in conversation for the Hall of Fame. But if you're batting 300, you're still getting it wrong 7 out of 10 times.
Yeah, taking a shot. And I see what you did there. As we sort of wind down, I want to ask you about Wesleyan a little bit. If a 22-year-old sitting in your class right now wants your job in 10 years, what's the one thing they absolutely can't learn from a course, a podcast, or a textbook?
They just have to have that passion for music, the shellac in their veins that Seymour Stein had when he was 14 years old. You've got to 24/7 this. You've got to be obsessed with it. And it's not for everybody. It's not for most people. You want to be an A&R person? Really? Do you know how much hair I had on my head when I started and how much hair I have on my head now? But when you get it right, it's the best feeling in the world because I'm not the artist. I'm not standing on stage at Madison Square Garden. I'm not, the songwriter, but I'm kind of the coach. If you ever remember the movie Rocky, where Mickey was in the corner, his cut man, his trainer. That's me. I'm Mickey. So when everyone cheers for Rocky, they don't cheer for Mickey, which is fine. But Mickey is in the corner, jumping up and down, going nuts when his guy is doing it right. So when I sign a group in the beginning and they're playing for 3 people at the local bar, including me and the bartender. And then, fast forward and I'm high-fiving them as they go on stage, headlining Madison Square Garden. That's, they're Rocky and I'm Mickey and I'm jumping up and down in the corner, and that for me, there's no better feeling in the world.
Great comparison. What are some of those, other than Chorus Line, what are some of those albums when you were young that, in those formative years that you still maybe come back to from time to time as comfort food?
I mean, for me, it's the great singers and the great songwriters, and they're not necessarily the same. So for me, my Mount Rushmore of singers is Karen Carpenter, Luther Vandross, Frank Sinatra, Aretha Franklin. My Mount Rushmore of songwriters are mainly the non-performing songwriters, like people like Jimmy Webb and Paul Williams and Gamble and Huff. So, I'm so privileged to get to sit on the board of the Songwriters Hall of Fame. And I get to sit in rooms with Paul Williams and Jimmy Webb and Desmond Child and some of these, just all-time great songwriters. But when you take a song like, Jimmy Webb's song, Wichita Lineman, and you give it to an artist like Glenn Campbell, or when you take the great Leon Russell song, Superstar, and you give it to the iconic vocal of Karen Carpenter, that's the A and the R coming together. And that's, why I get up every morning, crossing my fingers. Hopefully today's the day,
Where can people learn more about you and your class and your podcast and all the things that you do?
Well, the podcast is called Rock and Roll High School. It's on every platform. We're now in season 5 with, hopefully celebrating our 100th episode soon. But we've got a great bunch of guests, and it's all styles of music. You like rock music? Sure, that's there. You like punk music? Sure, that's there. You like disco music? Sure, that's there. You like photography? Bob Gruen did a podcast. You want to learn more about the executive side? Well, listen to Clive Davis. So It's Jimmy Webb did the podcast. Paul Williams did the podcast. The great
Amazing.
Lamont Dozier, the late great Lamont Dozier did the podcast. So you want to learn about the history of music? Listen to Rock and Roll High School, the podcast. It's on every platform. The everything we're doing at our company Pure Tone is puretone.com. You can go on the website, learn more about that. I started writing about a lot of these stories because I majored in English and never got to do it for real. So I have a Substack. It's Pete Ganbarg on Substack, Confessions of an A&R Guy. And I tell a lot of these stories on there, and that's been a very therapeutic, keeping me out of therapy.
Pete, it's such a pleasure to talk with you, man.
Yeah, this was great. Let's do it again, and look me up when you're in New York. We'd love to see you in person.
I certainly will. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.